So, Joel, I want to start with you because why not? Yeah, I know you have quite the background with films like Thor Ragnarok, Transformers films. With that rich background, as I call it, in their minds, how did the directors, Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, describe this film to you, and what made you want to do it?
Phil and Chris both called me during COVID, which was, a few years. How many years ago is that now? And they said they're doing this movie with Ryan Gosling, and how do I like Ryan Gosling? I said I love him. I did Nice Guys with him, and he was great. He's got amazing physical comedy, and he's also he can be dramatic when he needs to be dramatic, and he's also really fun to work with and very collaborative. And they said it's a movie about Ryan going to space and having a relationship with a rock, And I said, okay, I'm in. It's a rock. That was it. And they told me there was Andy Weir's novel that hadn't come out yet, and they mentioned a couple other, The Martian, of course, that mentioned, and they also mentioned another book he had written called Artemis. So I read that book, and I kind of got to know his humor a little bit. His humor is kind of similar in all his books, and I thought, okay, Andy's humor with Phil and Chris's humor with Ryan's humor, this is going to be really fun.
For Eric and Ethan, our dynamic duo in the sound department, I have read, and we'll see if this is true, that it was Joel that reached out to you about this, quote, really special project and that you should join. What was it about his pitch and your first read of the script, if you did read it, I'm assuming you did, that hooked you into doing this?
Last year, Joel reached out and mentioned this movie, and I had not read the book yet.
Can I stop you for a second?
Sure.
Every movie I'm on, I reach out to them. Every single when I start a job, my first call is Ethan and Eric. So anyway, just wanted to say that.
Oh, that's very nice of you, and the feeling is mutual. So Joel mentioned this Project Hail Mary, and by then the book had been out. So the next day I got the book, and this was before reading the script or seeing any footage, and I was just totally blown away. And as I'm reading it, I'm annotating it for sound and looking at sort of Andy Weir's descriptions of Rocky and thinking, oh my gosh, this might be the hardest task we've ever been given. You have kind of a main character. He's not just a tertiary, like one alien contact kind of moment, and you design like a minute of language kind of thing. This is a fully fledged character that's in way more than half of the story and has a personality, has behavior, has a range of emotions from serious to agitated and fearful and panicked and everything in between. And so it was one of those sort of sound design challenges presented to us where we actually had to really think like actors and do our sound design as if we were performing. And that's kind of how Chris and Phil directed us.
Ethan, what'd you think?
Well, yeah, so like Eric, I went out and read the book right away, and I was so excited about the idea of being able to really try and be as accurate as possible with the science parts of the story, specifically like the idea of how do we play sound in space. We've worked on some other movies that involved space, quite a few actually, and it's difficult because if you're going to be really accurate, then when you're in space, where there's no atmosphere, there is no sound in the vacuum of space. And of course, that creates some pretty big challenges for how to deal with that. And we were excited about the possibility of that brings and the challenges that brings, and how are we going to make it work. So
we did do a version with no sound, and I don't think that worked too well.
No, I mean it's a tricky balance to find. Unfortunately, the book and the screenplay gave us leeway in terms of, like, there's the whole fishing scene, which basically is in a low enough atmosphere that we're able to play sort of partial sound. So, and then in the scenes where Ryan's in deep space and doing his spacewalks, we were able to basically play it from his point of view, even in wide shots. So it's as if we're in his spacesuit with him, experiencing what it's like to be floating out in the vacuum of space. So we're hearing basically as if we're in his helmet, we're hearing him breathing, we're hearing sound through him touching things, the Solidian sound that he hears through his spacesuit. So it provided us a lot of great challenges for finding the right balance between sound and silence, basically.
Just to add to that, I think that staying accurate scientifically helped us tell that story too of what Dr. Grace is going through. There's that moment where for the very first time he gets into the airlock, gets his EV suit on, and enters this tunnel that Rocky has constructed. And it's not pressurized at that point. It's total vacuum. And we pull out every single sound in the track. There's not any sound, total digital silence. And I remember when we did that, it just gave me goosebumps. There's something so haunting. And, I saw it with an audience for the first time last week, and you could hear a pin drop. Like everyone was holding their breath and leaning forward, and it was an experience.
It actually adds tension. When you pull, I was kidding about it earlier, but when you pull the sound out, it adds tension and it makes you feel, like it gives you this feeling of, oh my God, what's going to happen, or this is scary. It adds another layer.
In the same vein, in a way, it makes it more engaging. It makes you lean in and really sort of helps suck you in to the experience that Ryan is having, right? The visceral experience of like the vastness and the loneliness of being the only person out here in the middle of literally nowhere.
Is that counter to your intuition, that stripping things back and really going with more silence? Because, as sound designers, sound professionals, you're layering and constantly building and trying to establish Rocky's language and the soundscape of the ship and what space is like. And it seems like your work would always be additive to a point. Is that tougher for you to strip things back?
In a way, you need the negative space. You need the silence to give the sounds you are playing meaning. And I always think of it like painting. There's a painting term called chiaroscuro, which is like Caravaggio, the masters, where you'll have like a shaft of light and then darkness all around it. And that gives the light meaning. And the same is true for sound. It's the absence of sound that gives the sound meaning. So I think in using silence strategically is kind of one of the most powerful tools that we can use in sound design.
That's what's so good about Ethan and Erik and all their sound design is they know when to pick out the sounds that we need to hear to tell the story, and they know when not to play the sounds. They're one of the few sound designers where I don't have to tell them, hey, whoa, that's too much.
So one other thing to point out about the idea of stripping away is it works on many different time scales. Because we're working in frames, basically, it makes a difference in as little as doing it within a single frame. Getting very singular with the sounds we're playing or taking everything out, even if it's only for a frame, makes a huge difference in terms of getting articulation and power out of the sound that we are playing. So from as little as a frame to as much as, say, 30 seconds can just really change the whole experience.
So in all the talks that I do with editors and sound designers, re-recording mixers, with very few exceptions, what comes to the forefront is that one part of the movie that gets worked on the most or obsessed over the most is the beginning, the open, how to get this thing off on the right foot. And you guys have talked a few times in different ways about getting the audience immersed and making it feel like you're there with Grace. I want to talk about the open, because we jump right in to his disorientation, him being in the ship, not knowing where he is and what's going on. And I just want to get a sense of like, how do you approach both the pacing and the context setting of those early scenes and getting the audience aligned with Grace?
A lot of that's the same in the book. That's how the book was written. The one thing that's not necessarily in the book is the first flashback where he learns about the Petrova line and where there's those news reporters that were talking about the problem. And what we did, we had a lot of footage of Ryan, of Grace waking up and not knowing where he is and discovering little things about the ship, that, or not even the ship, the area that he's in. He's in some sort of a medical bay, but then he wanders into another room and then he sees space outside and he realizes he's out in space. I think what we did with that is we built it so that the audience is learning the same time he's learning, but you're also you're learning about him as well. So there's kind of two things that we're kind of trying to track. We're trying to track the audience realizing that he doesn't know where he is. He's kind of just kind of coming out of a coma, waking up, and also we're showing the audience the problem that's going to come later in the movie that he's also going to discover. And so, we had a lot of footage, and we went through a lot of trial and error, and we landed, I think, in a pretty good place I think we landed in a pretty good place to propel us to the next sequence of the movie, which is him finding out that he doesn't have fuel, and him finding out that there's no way to get home, and waking up, learning more about what's around him.
And I'd say, like, the way, Joel, that you constructed it with Chris and Phil lent perfectly to sound for us to open the movie, because essentially Dr. Grace is waking up. He's in a coma. And he's waking up from a coma. So that's how we're starting the sound. We're welcoming the audience into that experience. So it starts very, very low. You might be hearing the trailers and it's like loud and loud and loud. And then our movie starts and it is like, okay, listen. And everything is kind of muffled, and you hear like some sort of deep little servos that are muffled of it's actually his medical bed moving, and you see a close-up of him and his eyes kind of flutter as he wakes up. And then it's really the zipper of his cryo bag, his coma bag, opening up, that then opens up the environment and the whole movie. So the sound design kind of mirrors Dr. Grace's own experience of like going from asleep and muffled to waking up. And that's where we bring Atmos in. That's where we bring in the whole Medbay sounds, the voice of the ship, Mary, what is 2 + 2, and that's, I love that kind of arc of letting the audience experience what our main character is experiencing.
Yeah, let them experience at the same time and learn at the same time what the story that we're trying to tell.
And something that was very important to Phil and Chris that they emphasized to us a lot from the very beginning is they really wanted to hear the geography of the ship and to help sort of illustrate that with the sound design. So we really focused on that from the beginning to give each room its own sonic identity.
So for Ethan and Erik, you guys have been working together for quite a while, and have quite a partnership, one that includes Oscar nominations for films like A Quiet Place, Argo, The Creator, Transformers Dark of the Moon, which you did with Joel. How do you balance the workload of the sound design? Does one of you build everything up, then the other one comes in and strips it back, or how do you do that?
Well, so we've been working together for 20 years. This fall, it'll have been 20 years. And our process is we like to work together and design together and go out and collect the ingredients for the movie together. Project Hail Mary, we got to go to Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Pasadena and collect, sounds for the Mary, from, pressurized coolant systems to robotics to space thrusters in their Robo Lab, which we used for the navigation sounds of the Hail Mary. We kind of just work shoulder to shoulder in tandem, first collecting the sounds and then working together as we put them together. It's a true partnership. Yeah.
What I'll add to that is Erik and I are really our own sort of worst critics, So we strive to, first of all, when we sit down and start working, how do we make ourselves happy? How do we give each other goosebumps? And if we can achieve that with each other, then we feel like we're in a good spot to present to Joel and Phil and Chris, whatever our ideas are. So that's kind of where we start, with the idea of knowing that we do feel like we're our own hardest critics, and we have a certain type of perfectionism and the feelings we want to create for ourselves. And hopefully that translates out into the wider world.
Yeah, our method is like to not settle on anything. And it's funny, like working with Phil and Chris, it kind of reminds me of that dynamic, like where, one person might be happy and then the other person will be like, yeah, but let's try something. And and uh and that combination, that creative alchemy of challenging each other makes the product more than the sum of its parts. It's to me, that's like the creative spirit. That's the beauty of what we do, is how do you find that that magic place where you both get goosebumps, like Ethan is saying.
Well, since we're talking about partnerships and you brought up Phil and Chris, I'd love to know how you work with two directors. Are they both with you at all times when a director needs to be there, or do they divide the workload in terms of either just load balancing, or one of them has an affinity for different parts of the director's role? How does that work?
On 21 Jump Street, that was their first live action movie, and there was a DGA rule, which there still is a DGA rule, that when you're on the set and you're directing and you're a partner, you're a pair of directors, two directors, you have to be on the set every time you're shooting anything. So you both have to be there if you're shooting inserts. You both have to be there if you're shooting second unit. But anytime that there's any shooting on the set, two directors have to be on the set. So they took that into the editing room. And on 21 Jump Street, they were always with me. Both of them were always with me all the time. And that's how they kind of, we just kind of got used to that. We got used to, having all three of us together all the time. So, and then I did some other projects with them, and then we did Hail Mary. So they kind of kept to that same rule, even though when you're in it doesn't apply for the editing room. It only applies for shooting, but they kind of kept to that rule. And it just becomes, what happens is it just becomes super collaborative. I mean, they're writers. They're used to being in writer's room with other writers and other directors. So they're used to everybody kind of chiming in and giving their ideas, or everybody, saying their ideas out loud and trying to figure out what the best idea is. So I think they like to be with a lot of people in a collaborative environment. They like people to give them their ideas. They don't want people just to be a pair of hands. They're more, they invite you to, to be open with ideas. So which is really great. As an editor, it's really great, because it gives me a lot of freedom to do things that sometimes I wouldn't have wouldn't have that freedom to do. It gives me a lot of freedom to come up with different storylines if I need to, or give them line suggestions or things like that. And so that's super helpful. It's really good, and it's nice to be so collaborative. There was a time when we were on the dub stage where we were looking at a scene in the movie where Rocky is. It's after Rocky saves Grace, and then he crawls, and then he goes into his habit trail and is kind of dying, and Grace comes in there, and we always had a line in there that where Rocky says, "Grace, watch Rocky sleep," and then Grace says, "Yeah, sure, I'm going to watch you sleep, pal." Well, we're in the dub stage working on that, and Juan Peralta, our sound mixer, said, "Hey, what if he just doesn't say anything? What if we just use his alien sound and Ryan understands what he's saying, or sorry, Grace understands what he's saying?" And we Phil and Chris were open to that, and they said, "Okay, let's try that," and it worked out wonderfully. And what happens is with that scene is, in the end of the movie, when everything is translated, you understand that Grace is learning his language. So it was just a really good idea, and Phil and Chris are open to people, giving their ideas, and they like that, and that's one of the wonderful things about working with Phil and Chris is they're just so open to, people that care about the movie and want to help. They're open to listening to anything they have to say.
Yeah, and it's really important that they are both there the whole time. We did a lot of sound design reviews where Joel was with us as well for those, as we're trying to come up with what's the voice of Rocky, what does he sound like as a character. And it was over, many months. It was maybe only once or twice where one of them had to leave at like 6:30 p.m. to do something. And we realized afterwards, like, oh, that was not good because you can easily go down into another rabbit hole or a dead end. And it's important that all of us are on the same page and that Chris and Phil are on the same page, because they didn't always agree on everything. So our job was to try to thread the needle and figure out, okay, how do we make both of them happy? How do we satisfy both of their tastes? And also satisfy ourselves and give it everything that we feel like it deserves. So we kind of all needed to be there together for it to work.
And to me, that sort of just points to their partnership being like a partnership in the truest sense of the word, in that together they're creating something that neither one of them would create alone. They're getting to a new place through the process of sort of fusing both of their minds together in a way. Erik and I can definitely relate to that idea. So it felt natural to us to, like, when we're going to work together, we want to be with both of them. And it was that way for almost all of the design sessions, as well as mixing on the stage. Really, they were both there pretty much all of the time for all of the playbacks and working sessions.
Well, I think by now most people are aware that the film was shot using practical sets and no conventional green screen. How did having that physical authenticity on set influence your respective workflows in post? For example, does it give you more usable material in the cutting room than a typical VFX-heavy production?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, Greg Fraser, who was the director of photography, was using a lot of handheld camera work, and we always had multiple cameras, and then we had a lot of handheld cameras, and it just gave us a lot of options. We weren't constricted to, it has to be in front of this green screen, or it has to be, a locked off camera, or so it just gave us a lot of options. And the other thing too is there were these, we call them Marshall cams, which are witness cameras all over the sets, or the sets that we're shooting down on the ship. We used a lot of those for the video log. Yeah, without practical sets, with having to use set extensions, having to have Ryan not only act in front of a carapace rock but also a green screen, I think that would have retracted from the emotion we're getting out of him and Rocky, and also it just made it, I think it was better overall for everybody, including not only for editing, for the DP and for the actors, and sound wise, I can't speak for sound, but it made a hard movie, which was really hard, a little easier.
Yeah, I mean, sound wise, I think it made it probably hardest for our production sound mixer. Just because there's such claustrophobic spaces and hard to hide mics and get booms in. And so, I mean, he did an amazing job, like miking everything there on the Mary in particular. And then, yeah, in terms of like the way it was shot practically, I think that did translate directly into our aesthetic, sound wise. One of the first things that Phil and Chris said to us was they wanted it to sound like it was captured in this location. You know, they didn't want a Hollywood fantasy kind of version of bleeps and bloops and, you know, Star Trek and that kind of thing. They wanted it to feel gritty and lived in and physical. They wanted Rocky to sound like there was an actual boom operator right there, and it felt like he was in that space.
I think Phil's word was messy.
Yeah, messy. We interpreted that as, yeah, captured. Like it shouldn't feel like it's constructed. And that's why Phil would ask for things to be messy, or Frankenstein was another term that was used, or ransom note. So, you know, like on the picture end, you embraced like jump cuts. On the sound end, we would do similar things to make it feel like it wasn't some sound designers' invisible hand making everything glossy, but making it instead feel more real. Like you want some of the edges, you want to hear a cut. You want to hear those like reflections, you know, on the set that you'd often take out. You want that sort of realism. Because ultimately, the more we can make the audience believe that this is actually happening, the more powerful it's going to be.
Yeah, and speaking of the jump cuts, I remember having conversations with you guys saying, let's do that with the sound too. You know, if the picture is going to cut, let's make the sound a little abrupt on the jump cuts, and let's experiment with that and see how that feels.
We did, and we ran with that. But it wasn't a hard and fast thing. So it was more of a feeling based, because it wasn't like we're going to take this rule and apply it everywhere across the board, but really depending on feeling and emotion. Always goes back to that. How does it make us feel? So sometimes we're going to want it to feel the edges, and sometimes we're going to want it sort of smooth. And it's just changing moment to moment. That's one of the things I love about the work that we all do, is the fact that it is based on feeling more than science or engineering. That's what makes it an artistic endeavor. The fact that there are no rules, really. It's all about what feeling do we want to create, and how do we want this story to unfold.
Yep. I get asked that question a lot. You know, I get asked, well, you know, when you did the whole scene, how did you create the tension, or how did you know what to cut to, or how did you build it so that it became such an exciting, scene? And what I really want to say is, well, I just feel it. You know, you just feel like, okay, now I want to see this. You know, now I want to see the peril. I want to see Grace up above and see what's below him. But now I want to go to Rocky, you know, wondering what's happening with Grace on top. And it's just you put it together. I really like what you said, Ethan, because that's exactly how I work. I just feel it. You just feel, okay, this is what I need to cut to. This is what the audience needs to see. This is how I feel. You know, this is what I feel should happen. And this is going to make me feel, you know, like want to make me feel like I'm on the edge of my seat. This is going to make me feel like I'm about to cry. That's you pretty much. I mean, it's intuition that you use a lot. You know.
Yeah, it's intuition and gut reaction. Yep. You know, that's the place we start. We take like the first cut that Joel has put together, and then Erik and I will sort of take a pass, and we're operating from intuition and gut feeling, and then get to a place that feels right. And then the sort of intellectual part of it tends to come, I think, after that, where you start thinking about why things are working the way they are. But in terms of the creative process, it's less about figuring it out intellectually and more about getting the feeling that we want to get.
So I did have a note. I wasn't going to ask this question, and now that you brought up the jump cuts and also just feeling things out, you said, what do I cut to next? Well, whatever my instinct tells me to do. I thought I noticed a couple of match cuts in there. I think one was a pair of sneakers to another pair of sneakers. I think another one was sort of a circular motion. How do you come to something like that? Do Phil and Chris put that in there like, hey, we want to do this? Or is that something just as you pour over the dailies, you start to see how that could come together?
No, that was actually something that it's Chris's specialty. We did it on we did a TV show for Apple TV called After Party, and After Party was a murder mystery with a lot of flashbacks, and it's really super technical. I can explain it to you. It's super super technical. So please, if you can't follow me, you put an image up on a screen, you take a piece of tape, you mark the eye, you mark the other eye, you mark the nose, and you mark the mouth, and then you put the other image and you just line them up so that they're perfectly together, or the tennis shoes, and then that's it.
Perfectly in keeping with the authentic style of this film.
Right.
Again, sort of along the same lines of having a practical set with no green screen, even though Rocky's language is developed and refined in post, James Ortiz voiced and puppeteered him on the set. How much did that performance influence your eventual sound vocabulary, if at all?
Well, I'll say something, then you guys can say something. James, his voice, he was the head puppeteer who was leading other puppeteers. There was probably like 6, I think, on Rocky, one for each arm and one for the body. And he would be reading the lines to Ryan on the set, and he would, be acting out the lines. And he knew the story so well, and he was working so well with Ryan that we used his voice for all the screenings, all the previews, and everything. And then when we started auditioning other voices of actors, it didn't feel right. It felt wrong, and we ended up using our James. He became the voice of Rocky, and the one thing that he didn't do well is the alien sounds. The alien sounds that he did, he was just making gibberish noise, and we had to eliminate that early on, it wasn't helpful at all. I think Ethan and Erik had to start from the beginning.
It's interesting that you say that, because I didn't ever hear any of what you're describing as James.
Oh, we took it out quickly.
Right. We never even knew that it existed, but it doesn't sound like it would have been helpful to our process anyways. I feel like what we did get from James's performance was sort of the character and energy that we wanted Rocky to have. But obviously, because it's a completely different language, the Iridian, I think that's where the sort of similarities stop pretty much, because Rocky's language, his Iridian voice is, musically based. And so that was obviously its own process to find, first of all, what is the right sort of basic sound and character of his voice. And then sort of once we got that into the ballpark, which was itself quite a process, going through a lot of different experiments to get to something that felt right, then it was about, okay, how do we create sentences and words, sentences, and language.
There was also the performance part of it too, which was a huge part of it. The performance part of the Iridian. One of the things that we did, which was really helpful to everybody, including Ethan and Erik, is, for example, the scene where where Rocky's he's tapping, and he says, "Oh no, you're not tapping, you're pointing." Phil and Chris recorded actually English dialogue for what they wanted Rocky to be saying. So they would be saying things like, "Oh no, it's over there, it's over there, it's over there, you dummy, over there, over there." And then Ethan and Erik took that sound and they made Iridian sounds that match whatever the English is that Phil and Chris were doing. We have recordings of Phil and Chris acting out an entire scene and a couple other scenes, and I think that was really helpful for them to kind of get the performance and the cadence and the just the the emotion out of what Rocky's conveying at that moment.
That was invaluable. That was, yeah, totally invaluable, because there's so many different ways to interpret that scene. So that was super helpful. And the word performance, so Chris and Phil are doing a performance to help us with our performance. The first thing they ever said to us about the Iridian, how to approach it, was they wanted it to sound like a performance. It can't be a canned kind of thing. We'd record sounds and sample them, perform them on the keyboard. We wound up throwing all that out because it didn't feel random and imperfect the way a natural, like, live performance would be. So that pushed us down this route of, to create Rocky's language. There's basically two different ingredients to Rocky's language. There's musical instrument, which are all human performed, and then the animal world, which is avian species and humpback whale and dozens of others. And on the human performance side, every single sound, and this is maybe 70% of Rocky, is performed by a human, whether it's me or we had Jan Henrikse is kind of an experimental wind musician who invents different instruments, and he had some really wacky stuff that he'd built, and which we didn't use, but it was all part of the process of experimenting, trying to find that natural performance that doesn't sound like a recognizable instrument, but can be used and layered in a way that can sound like Iridian language. And so from Jan, we did wind up using a little bit of contralto flute, which is a much deeper sounding flute. And then in the studio here, performed with the ocarina, which that was Chris's idea. He's like, try an ocarina. And one day he brought in a jug, pulled it out of the trunk of his car. He's like, I got a gift for you guys today. And it was like a jug band style, like pottery jug that we performed for the deeper bass notes for Rocky. So it's everything you hear from Rocky is a living, either human or animal, performing. And that's for Rocky's word for goodbye.
Nice.
Did you
Nice.
literally have like a vocabulary for Rocky written out, like this is what this sound equals in a word that you used to refer to?
Once we figured out his sound, then that's what he's got a 250 word vocabulary.
That was better than me.
The sounds for the words was an evolving process that kept changing, like literally right down to the day we're actually finishing the creative part of the sound mixing, because we'd be on the stage and the word that we had invented or that had been created for grace, the first time it's used, it plays as a joke. And then later on in the movie, of course, Rocky uses it a lot, but the sound didn't really work in a different context as well. So we had to sort of evolve it.
As if Rocky's come to realize that that was kind of an insulting word, that was our justification. Yeah.
But that's just as a sort of one example of many of where we had to sort of go in and change certain words because they no longer applied in a different context. And then in some cases, that meant we would need to go to like 6 other places scattered throughout the movie and sort of go in and surgically replace the word with the new word. It was very much a sort of evolving process. And we knew that when we started. We quickly realized this is not something we're going to like get nailed down hard and fast. We could see that it was going to be something that was going to evolve right through the whole creative process. So we specifically kept our sessions for all of Rocky's Iridian language in its own session, which is not something we would normally do because we like to work holistically and have all the sounds basically in one session so we can have everything work against each other. But in this case, since we realized it was going to be so complicated with so many adjustments through the whole process, we decided it needed to be in its own session and playing off its own system. So that's something we did. And early on, we made that decision. And there were many times through the end that Erik and I would say to each other, thank God we put Rocky's Iridian language on its own system.
So yeah, if you're on the mixing stage and you go on to what's called a KVM, you can see all of the different Pro Tools playback machines. So you'll have dialogue, music, sound effects, and Rocky was one of those. He had his own dedicated machine that was actually running at a higher sample rate. We ran that at 96 kilohertz so that we had more resolution to stretch and manipulate and retain the fidelity with him. So that's kind of the first time we've ever done that.
So the final runtime of the film is it 2 hours 37? Am I remembering that right, or close to that?
236, I believe. Right?
236.
Joel?
Okay.
Yeah.
As I was watching your film, the one thing I took away was I could see a shorter movie, but it wouldn't be nearly as good. Where a lot of times I see a 2.5-hour movie, I'm like, yeah, well, there's no way to make this any shorter or certainly any better. But your movie, there's another version in here, but it's just not nearly as good. And I just want to get a sense from you, just the challenges you faced in pacing the film and tightening the film, and where you had to make what you felt at the time might have been sacrifices, but in the end made a better movie.
Oh, there's a million other movies in this movie. We've got enough footage to make 1,000 movies out of it. No, I think what we did is, even when the movie was longer, even when it was 3 hours, we would show it to people, and they still loved it. I think we had something, even with all the footage after everything was built, even on our longest version, you could tell there's something there. You could tell there's something special there. You can see the relationship between Grace and Rocky. You could see the relationship between Strat and Grace was really good. We had some great, and also between Carl and Grace. We had some great relationship stories, relationship pieces. We had, we knew that the visual effects, once they were done, once they would come in, it's going to be beautiful. We just had to, for lack of a better word, be responsible and just make it a length that was practical, and we would, some things were easy to take out. Some scenes it was obvious that, oh yeah, this is, Grace is acting too drunk, so let's shorten that, or he's, being too goofy. Okay, let's take that out. So that got us down a little bit. And then the closer we got to the runtime that it is now, the harder it got to take things out. And we montaged up a lot of sequences that, which also saved time, and then the jump cuts saved some time. But that was always the plan anyway, to do jump cuts like that. That's kind of Phil and Chris's style. That's what they like to do. But I think it just organically just got shorter and tighter as we were getting shots in, as we were finishing sequences. Some of the sequences that were that had heavy visual effects in them, they start out long, and as the visual effects come in, they just get shorter. And we would screen it for audiences, and we would screen it for friends and family, and we would get feedback, and focus on areas that people are having trouble with or not necessarily engaged with, and we would make it as engaging as possible. And in doing that, shortened it. So I think it's just a matter of chipping away and polishing and making things clearer, and it just comes out. The time just comes out naturally. Again, there were a couple. There's one scene which I'd like to mention, which was a beautiful scene, and we took it out of the movie. and it was shot early on. I don't know if you guys ever even saw this. I'm sure you saw this.
Which scene was that?
Well, it was shot early on in the movie, and it was a scene where Rocky was watching Grace sleep. We had two scenes of Rocky watching Grace sleep. This was the second one. It was before. It was the night before he goes and collects the astrophage for the first time, and it's like it was like two kids at summer camp. Rocky was kept talking, and Grace is like, "Come on, we got to get to sleep," and it was just so endearing. It was so. You guys remember that scene?
I don't remember
I
it.
don't remember that one.
It was just such a nice scene, but it was one of the earliest scenes of Rocky, and the puppeteering was all really good. We didn't any enhancement of the puppeteering. It was really good. Rocky kind of sneaks out, and Grace sees him, and he says, "I can still see you up there." And I cut it together. We were looking at dailies one day, and when we were shooting in England, and I showed that sequence, and everybody said, "That's our Rocky. That is our Rocky. We love that character. We love that character." So that became kind of the model for everybody to kind of follow for the Rocky character. And even though the thing got taken out of the movie, it still served its purpose because it was helpful in showing our character Rocky, and showing how it's how he developed.
Save it for the sequel.
Yeah, exactly. I know you guys have seen that scene. It was in the movie for a long. It was in and out. We moved it into different places.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna check.
All right.
As we start to wrap things up, I've heard each of you say in one manner or another, this was a really hard movie to do. I think I heard it yesterday in our aborted first attempt at recording this. I've heard it a few times today. As long as it's for reasons that you care to share, what made this film so hard to do?
On the set, I ran into Ryan. It was the first time I saw him. It was like the first week of the show, or not the first week. It's probably like 3 weeks into the show, and he told me he had just finished the cockpit sequence, which is, we had 20-minute takes, maybe, of him in the cockpit and he says, "This is the hardest movie I've ever done." So it was hard. Mainly, for me, it was hard because we had a lot. Kind of going back to what I just talked about. We had a lot of good footage. We had a lot of great footage, a lot of great pieces in our dailies that we had to find, and we had to scour for, and we had to just make. And I didn't want to break anything. The movie, the script was so good, the assembly was so good. I just, the versions of the movie that we came out were so good. I just didn't want to break it. I just wanted to make sure that we were making the best movie possible with this amazing material. That's what made it hard. I think that's what made it hard for me. It was like a embarrassment of riches. You had a lot of good stuff, and you didn't want to mess it up. So.
Yeah, and how do you figure out like what to not include? Because it's all so great.
Yeah, I think it's the hardest thing I've ever worked on. Maybe it's just because it's so fresh in my mind. We just finished it like not just a few weeks ago, but it's one of those movies, like Joel said, that is so good that you just want it to be perfect. It's the opposite of phone it in kind of a thing. And there's so many infinite possibilities. And you want to, this is how Chris and Phil work. They want to turn every stone over. They want to explore every option and find just out of the ether that combination of ideas that makes the experience the best that it can be. And the other thing that made it really hard was, well, Ethan and I have worked on a bunch of hard movies. Like mostly what we do is like the hardest kind of stuff. And when it comes to creature sound design, we did Gareth Edwards' Godzilla. If you add up every Godzilla vocal in that whole film, it maybe is 2 minutes, something like that. Or King Kong, you add up every King Kong vocal, that's maybe 5 minutes. this is over an hour of like a completely new language that we had to invent and work with these brilliant filmmakers to figure it all out. There's just no shortcuts. You just got to embrace that. You just got to do the hard work, and that's what both made it the hardest movie I think I've ever worked on, and maybe the most gratifying movie I've ever worked on. Yeah.
Well, as a fan, I'm grateful for your hard work. It was an amazing movie. And I know you guys are still hard at work on other things, and I've taken up a lot of your time. Before I let you go, there is one thing I'm dying to know, and that is Rocky makes these amazing figurines that he makes for Grace as an early means of communicating. Please tell me that some of those ended up as crew gifts.
Okay.
We'll tell you that, but it's not true.
Andy Weir mentioned that he has some of the rejects. Yeah.
Anything for you, Joel?
You mean crew gifts wise?
Yeah.
Or?
Nice.
What did you get?
I got a sweatshirt.
Very practical.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to get you what we accrued.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, visual aids.
No, we got something actually pretty unusual and pretty cool. Like one of the coolest crew gifts I've ever gotten on any movie.
More unusual than a sweatshirt?
A little bit.
Here it comes.
All right. So, yeah, the sound team got these guys. And if you were to open it up, inside is a golden record, an homage to the Hall of Records scene in the movie, which is a reference to Carl Sagan's Voyager records. And
oh, cool.
Yeah, I think it's super nice.
I did get that same crew gift too. It was really nice.
And it features some of the music that was used, I think, on set as inspiration. Some David Bowie.
Okay, hold on one.
I was able to play it a couple weeks ago because I actually got my son a couple turntables because he's gotten into DJing with vinyl, and so I was able to play it. It's great.
Okay, I know we have to go. I just remembered. I have this, which I don't know if you could. I'll just and then I'll read it. I'll read it to you. I got this from Chris and Phil, and he gave it to every crew member after they finished shooting. Certificate of Awesomicity. This is the bear is entitled to free drinks for life while in our practice, including but not restricted to cocktails, mocktails, beer, mead, smoothies, and nut milks, both carbonated and not carbonated.
Yeah.
Thanks to
Love it.
Thanks to, I can't read. I don't know what it said. Anyway, so I'm gonna laminate I'm gonna shrink this, put it in my wallet, laminate it. Free drinks time I see Chris and Phil. So the rest of my life.
Those are all great gifts. It isn't the little mini figurine, but those are all great gifts. I think you guys gave audiences a great gift in this film. And I know it's been a little bit of a rough ride getting this interview recorded. I really want to thank you for sticking with it. And thank you for jumping on your Earth portable thinking machines and talking to me today.
Thanks so much.
Amaze.
Yep.
So same time tomorrow, guys?
Yeah.